Ever get that feeling where you need to get your head around something massive, like, say, the whole sprawling history of country music?
Oh, yeah.
It's a wild ride of sounds and stories, right? From those old-time porch jams all the way to, stadium-filling anthems.
Definitely.
Maybe you're wondering where it all kicked off, how it's morphed over the years, or maybe you just want some cool tidbits to share.
Well, that's exactly what we're digging into today. We've got a stack of sources that chart the whole history.
Right.
Taking us all the way from the 1920s right up to now. It's a real patchwork, artists, genres, some surprising turns along the way.
Totally. I mean, think about it. There's almost 100 years of music. All those different styles, those legendary figures.
It's a lot to cover.
Yeah, so our mission, basically, is to cut through all that noise and pull out the real gems, the key moments, the stuff that makes you think, okay, now I get it.
Exactly. We're aiming for a clear, hopefully fun overview without getting totally bogged down in every single tiny detail.
Will that take forever?
Right, and it's a story that unfolds in these distinct chapters almost, each with its own vibe.
Okay.
So we'll be looking at those foundational early recordings, then the boom of radio and the fresh sounds it brought in.
Like Western swing.
Western swing, honky-tonk, then the rockabilly explosion, that smooth Nashville sound.
Uh-huh.
Then the rebellious outlaw era, the pop crossover craze.
I have to cross over.
Oh, yeah. Then the return to more traditional sounds. The 90s, when country just went huge.
Garth Brooks era.
Totally.
Yeah.
And how pop and rock have kept shaking things up, right up to today. It's quite a journey.
It really is. Okay, so let's jump right into the deep end then. The 1920s, the very beginning. What were those first sounds we're talking about?
Okay, so the very first commercial recordings, the ones considered kind of in that traditional country vein, they were actually instrumental.
No singing.
Nope, just fiddles. Arkansas Traveler and Turkey in the Straw. These two fiddlers, Henry Gilliland and A.C. Robertson Robertson,
Right.
recorded way back June 1922, count April 23, all about the fiddles.
So voices came a bit later then.
Yeah, just a bit. Columbia Records wasn't far behind, though. They started their hillbilly music series in 1924.
Okay.
Now, the first commercially recorded country tune that actually had singing and lyrics that's generally recognized as Fiddlin' John Carson's Little Log Cabin in the Lane.
Fiddlin' John Carson.
Yeah.
Got it.
Recorded June 1923.
So Carson gives us that first vocal, but who really broke out first, like reached a much wider audience?
That would probably be Vernon Dalhart. His song Wreck of the Old 97.
Oh, I know that one.
Yeah. Came out May 1924. It was the first real nationwide country hit.
Wow.
And here's a cool bit of trivia. The flip side, the B-side, Lonesome Road Blues, was also a massive hit.
No way. A double whammy.
Pretty much.
Interesting. And what about women? Were there any women making records in those super early days?
Absolutely. You got to mention Samantha Bumgarner and Eva Davis, April 1924. They were the first female musicians to actually record and release country songs. Their Columbia record had Samantha on fiddle and singing Big-Eyed Rabbit, and then Eva on banjo singing Wild Bill Jones on the other side.
That's fantastic. So it wasn't just the guys right from the get-go.
Not at all.
What about the music itself? Was it all just one particular style back then?
No, definitely not. It was a real mix of things. Even early on, some artists like Cliff Carlisle, he was a yodeler.
Right.
He even recorded blues songs well into the 1930s. So that shows you that early crossover between genres,
Yeah, the lines were blurred already.
Totally. And you had a whole bunch of important early recording artists really shaping the sound. Names like Riley Pocket, Don Richardson, Uncle Dave Macon.
Legends.
Charlie Poole and the North Carolina Ramblers, the Skillet Lickers.
Yeah.
It was a really lively emerging scene.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
And I came across something about the steel guitar making an early appearance. That seems early.
Yeah, surprisingly early, around 1922, believe it or not. This guy, Jimmy Tarleton, met a Hawaiian guitarist out on the West Coast, Frank Ferreira. And that meeting basically brought the steel guitar sound into the genre.
Wow, 1922. Okay, now, you can't talk about early country without mentioning the Bristol Sessions. That feels like a real, like a cornerstone moment.
You're absolutely right. Bristol, August 1st, 1927, it was pivotal, just completely game-changing.
What happened there?
Well, you had this talent scout, Ralph Peer.
Right, I've heard the name.
Yeah, he went down there and discovered both the Carter family and Jimmie Rodgers, both of them, in those sessions.
In the same sessions? Wow.
Yeah, it was such a big deal. There's even like a nod to something similar in that movie, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Oh, right, with the Soggy Bottom Boys and the recording guy in the field.
Exactly that kind of thing, finding raw talent.
So tell me about the Carter family. What made them so significant?
Well, the Carters, they're from Scott County, Virginia, and they brought this real sense of tradition, but also musicality. Interestingly, they actually learned to read music using solfege.
Solfege, like do remind.
Yeah, exactly, to read hymnals and sheet music. And over the next, 17 years, starting right after Bristol in 27, they recorded around 300 songs?
300.
Yeah. Old-time ballads, traditional tunes, country songs, gospel hymns, just capturing the stories and heritage of the American Southeast. It's a massive body of work.
It really is. And Jimmie Rodgers, his sound was quite different, wasn't it? More bluesy.
Absolutely. Rodgers was a real innovator, a pioneer. He blended so many different styles, hillbilly country, sure, but also gospel, jazz, blues, pop, even cowboy and folk influences. He was a great songwriter, too. And his hit Blue Yodel, often called Blue Yodel #1 or T for Texas, sold over 1 million copies. That really cemented him as the first major star of country music.
The singing brakeman.
That's the one.
And the Carter family's influence. It just kept going, didn't it?
Yeah.
Through the generation.
Yeah. It definitely did. Mae Bell Carter, especially, kept the tradition going with her daughters, who became the Carter sisters.
Right.
And then her daughter, June. Well, through her marriages to Carl Smith, Rip Nix, and of course, Johnny Cash.
Johnny Cash.
Exactly. Subsequent generations of her family became country singers, too. It's a real dynasty, a true musical legacy.
Amazing. Okay, so the 20s set the stage. Foundational stuff. What happens moving into the 1930s and 40s? Sounds like radio becomes a huge deal.
Oh, absolutely huge. The Great Depression, it really hit record sales hard. People just didn't have the money.
Right.
But radio stepped right in. It was free entertainment. And suddenly these barn dance radio shows featuring country music started popping up all over the South and even beyond.
And the most famous of these has got to be the Grand Ole Opry, right? Still going today.
No question. The Opry started in 1925 by WSM in Nashville. It became this crucial platform, essential. Early stars like Uncle Dave Macon, Roy Acuff.
Acuff, yeah.
And the amazing harmonica player DeFord Bailey, who was actually the Opry's first African-American star.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And by 1934, WSM got this powerful 50,000-watt signal, clear channel.
Whoa.
Which meant the Opry could be heard all across the country. Just imagine spreading the sound of country music far and wide like that. It must have really helped solidify its popularity.
It absolutely sounds like a total game changer.
Yeah.
Were there new sounds starting to emerge in this period too, beyond those early styles?
Yeah, definitely. We started to see more of that genre mixing, that experimentation. Musicians like Moon Mullican, for example.
Moon Mullican, great name.
Isn't it? He recorded Western swing, but also tracks that, looking back, we'd now definitely call rockabilly. Even back then.
Huh. Precursors.
Exactly. And this era also saw the rise of some incredibly productive songwriters, like Jenny Lou Carson, no relation to Fiddlin' John, by the way. She was just a songwriting machine between, say, 1945 and 1955, wrote tons of hits.
And what about the whole singing cowboy thing? That seems so iconic of that time. Gene Autry, Roy Rogers.
The singing cowboys and Western swing. They really took off in the 30s and 40s. And yeah, largely thanks to Hollywood Western.
The movie stars.
Huge stars. Gene Autry, the Sons of the Pioneers, Roy Rogers, they became household names.
Right.
It's important to remember, though, even though country music and Western music were often played together on the radio.
Which is where country and Western comes from.
Exactly. That's the term. But they were, and arguably still are, distinct styles of music. Different origins, different feels sometimes.
Right, okay. So the image of the cowboy gets really tied to country music, even if the musical styles aren't always exactly the same.
Precisely.
Right.
That imagery is powerful.
And were there prominent female voices in that Western scene, too? Cowgirls.
Absolutely. You got to talk about Patsy Montana. She really kicked open the door for solo female artists with her massive hit, I Want to Be a Cowboy Sweetheart.
That's the one, yeah.
Sold 1 million records. It was a significant step, More opportunities for women in the genre.
Definitely. And Bob Wills, he's just a massive figure in Western swing, isn't he? The Texas Playboys.
He absolutely is. Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys were incredibly popular. They were in those Western films, too.
Uh-huh.
His music was this fantastic blend, country and jazz, really. Started out as dance hall music, for people to dance to, and evolved into Western swing.
So it had that swing rhythm.
Totally. But he wasn't the only one, of course. There were other early pioneers like Cliff Bruner, Moon Mullican again, Milton Brown.
Right.
And later on, really popular bands led by Spade Cooley and Tex Williams. Western swing, at its height, was a real rival to the big band swing music that was popular nationally.
Wow. It sounds like the instruments being used were changing during this time as well. I heard something weird about people not wanting drums.
That's totally right. It sounds funny now, but yeah. Early country musicians often looked down on drums.
Why? Too loud.
Yeah, too loud, maybe not pure enough for the music, too much like jazz or rock and roll later on.
Huh.
But Bob Wills, as early as 1935, he'd already added drums to the Texas Playboys. He didn't care.
A real blazer.
Yeah. But even into the mid-40s, the Grand Ole Opry was hesitant. They didn't want their drummer, the first staff drummer they hired, actually playing on stage where people could see him. Seriously. It wasn't really until the early 1960s that drums became, a standard, accepted part of most country bands.
That's wild. And Wills also used electric guitar early.
Yep. Bob Wills again. One of the first to regularly use an electric guitar in his band, way back in 1938.
In the 30s. That's much earlier than I would have guessed.
Yeah, people often think of the 50s, but it was showing up before that.
And what about that song, Guitar Boogie? That name popped out at me.
Arthur Guitar Boogie Smith, 1948. That track was a real game changer.
How so?
Well, it cracked the top 10 on the U.S. country chart, but it also crossed over onto the pop chart. Yeah. Big time. It gave a lot of people their first real taste of what the electric guitar could do, especially in that country context. It was influential.
And the type of electric guitar sound changed too.
Yeah, it evolved. For a while, a lot of the session guys in Nashville preferred that warmer, mellower sound of like arch-top electric guitars, Gibson style.
Right.
But eventually, that hotter, more cutting Fender sound, the Telecaster, the Stratocaster that became the signature electric guitar tone in country music for many artists, especially out in Bakersfield.
We'll get to Bakersfield.
Yeah.
So from acoustic fiddles to electric guitars,
the
sound is definitely shifting. What about hillbilly boogie? That sounds intriguing.
Hillbilly boogie.
Yeah.
It showed up around 1939 with a guy named Johnny Barfield doing a song called Boogie Woogie.
Okay.
But after World War II, post-1945, it really took off. The Delmar Brothers Freight Train Boogie is a great example.
Right.
And a lot of people see that sound, that feel, as a definite precursor to rockabilly. It had that energy.
Thanks.
Arthur Guitar Boogie Smith had even more success with it, obviously. And other artists like Moon Mullican, Tennessee Ernie Ford, they jumped on board too. It was this lively mix, this blend that definitely played a part in country's evolution towards rock and roll.
And towards the end of this second generation period, the 40s, we start to see the beginnings of bluegrass, right?
Yeah.
As a distinct thing.
Yes, exactly. Right around the end of World War II, bluegrass emerged as its own style. Bill Monroe,
the father of bluegrass.
That's him. He teamed up with Lester Flatt on guitar and vocals, and crucially, Earl Scruggs on banjo.
Scruggs' banjo style.
Yeah, that three-finger style just defined the sound. And they were actually introduced together on the Grand Ole Opry stage by Roy Acuff.
Wow.
That moment, that band lineup, Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys, is often considered the birth of bluegrass as we know it.
Cool. And gospel music was still big, too.
Oh, hugely popular. Gospel always ran alongside country, Deep roots. Red Foley, who was a massive country star right after the war, he had a million-selling gospel hit with Peace in the Valley. But showing how fluid things were, he also sang boogie, blues, even stuff that bordered on rockabilly.
Versatile guy.
Very. And it's interesting, the terms people were using were still shifting. In the post-war period, the music trades often called it folk, while the industry insiders still used hillbilly sometimes.
Right.
It wasn't until 1949 that Billboard magazine finally settled on the chart name Country and Western, and that stuck for a long time.
Country and Western. Okay. And we absolutely can't forget honky-tonk in this era. That sounds like a really distinct kind of down-to-earth style bar music.
Honky-tonk was definitely that. A stripped-down, raw sound, really popular, especially in what some people called the Tex-Homex states, Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico.
Tex-Homex, okay.
Yeah. And it drew from Western swing, definitely, but also Mexican ranchera music and the blues, a real working-class sound.
Who are the key figures?
Well, Bob Wills was influential there, too, embodying that mix. But Al Dexter had some huge early hits with honky-tonk blues and later Pistol Packin' Mama.
Catchy title.
Right. These songs were really tied to those roadside bars, those honky-tonks.
What?
And the artists most associated with it. Ernest Tubb.
E.T. Yeah.
Kitty Wells, who became the first major female country solo superstar, the queen of country music.
Kitty Wells.
Ted Daffin, Floyd Tillman, the Maddox Brothers and Rose. Lefty Frizzell with his really unique vocal style.
Lefty, yeah.
And, of course, Hank Williams.
Can't talk honky-tonk without Hank.
Absolutely not. Hank Williams' influence just cannot be overstated. He inspired so many, including those early rock and roll pioneers. And he really shaped the sound for later honky-tonk legends like George Jones.
George Jones.
Yeah. And then you had guys like Webb Pierce who just dominated the charts in the 1950s with that classic honky-tonk sound.
Okay, so the 50s and 60s. That brings us to the third wave, or third generation.
Yeah.
It sounds like a time of even bigger changes, especially with rockabilly bursting onto the scene.
Absolutely. The early 50s still had that ongoing mix, Western swing was still around, country boogie, honky-tonk was huge.
Right.
Interestingly, Western music itself, those cowboy ballads, the New Mexico sound, Texas country, Tejano rhythms, actually hit a peak in popularity in the late 1950s. Think Marty Robbins' El Paso.
Great song.
Classic. And this strong Western influence, in a lot of ways, maybe kept the folk revival and folk rock movements from having a massive impact on country music at that time.
Oh, so?
Well, partly because the politics were often quite different. The folk revival had a generally more liberal slant, while the country audience, particularly then, tended to be more conservative. There wasn't always a lot of crossover appeal.
Okay.
Makes sense. John Denver, later on, was a notable exception. He really managed to bridge that gap successfully.
Right. And then, boom, rockabilly just explodes in the mid-50s.
Yeah.
What was the connection there? How did that happen?
Well, a couple of things. Back in 53, the very first radio station that played nothing but country music was set up in Lubbock, Texas.
Just country. Wow.
Yeah, KDAV.
Yeah.
It shows you the growing infrastructure for the genre, right? And the music of the 50s and 60s increasingly aimed at the American working class, especially truckers.
Oh, driving songs.
Yeah, that whole subgenre starts taking off. Dave Dudley's 6 Days on the Road is maybe the classic example.
Okay.
So rockabilly, with its upbeat mix of blues and country R&B influences, it just clicked with a lot of younger country fans. It was exciting.
Who were the first big names?
Well, Bill Haley, who actually used to be a Western yodeler.
No kidding.
Yeah, he's credited with some of the first really successful rock and roll records like Crazy Man, Crazy, and obviously Rock Around the Clock.
Uh-huh.
But 1956, that was really the year of rockabilly in country music. You had Elvis Presley.
Elvis. From Sun Records.
Johnny Cash, Carl Perkins,
Yeah,
just
really.
dominating the country charts as well as the pop charts.
Cash, too. Wow.
Oh, yeah. Even traditional artists kind of dip their toes in. George Jones actually released a rockabilly record under the pseudonym Thumper Jones.
Thumper Jones. That's
It is.
amazing.
Isn't it? Now, while a lot of those rockabilly musicians eventually went back to more mainstream country or found their own unique styles like Cash did, it was a really significant moment. Genres colliding, energy changing.
For sure. And this is when country music starts getting more national attention, right?
Yeah.
Not just on the radio, like TV.
Exactly. National TV shows like Ozark Jubilee, it ran from 55 to 60 out of Springfield, Missouri.
Okay.
It showcased all the top country stars and those rockabilly artists, too. It brought country music visually into living rooms across America, a much wider audience.
Like Webb Pierce said, TV was breaking down those regional barriers.
Precisely, making it national.
It makes sense, though, that with all that fast change, all that rock and roll energy coming in, there would be some pushback.
Yeah.
From the traditionalists, is that where the Country Music Association comes in?
Yes, exactly. The CMA was formed in 1958. And you're right, part of the motivation was definitely concern among some established country musicians and industry folks about how much influence rock and roll was having on their genre. They wanted to protect and promote country music specifically.
Okay. And then kind of going in a different direction from rockabilly, we get the Nashville Sound. That sounds like a very deliberate move.
It was absolutely deliberate. Starting in the mid-50s, but really taking off in the early 60s, the Nashville Sound was a conscious effort to make country music more, well, polished, more sophisticated maybe.
Aiming for a broader audience. Pop crossover.
Precisely. Turning country into a big multi-million-dollar industry centered in Nashville. You had producers like Chet Atkins at RCA Victor, Owen Bradley at Decca.
Good names.
Huge figures. They developed this smoother sound, borrowing heavily from 1950s pop music. Prominent, smooth vocals, often with string sections, lush vocal choruses.
Playing down the fiddle and steel.
Yeah, de-emphasizing those more traditional country instruments, the instrumentals in general, really. Key artists included Jim Reeves, Skeeter Davis, Patsy Cline,
Patsy Cline classic.
Eddie Arnold, who'd been around but adapted. And the slip note piano style of Floyd Kramer became a real signature of that sound.
Right. that piano sound.
It was hugely successful commercially, no doubt about it, but its dominance in the mainstream started to fade around 1964.
Why is that?
Well, two big things. The British invasion, Beatles, Stones, etc., changed the pop landscape dramatically. And tragically, you had the deaths of both Jim Reeves and Patsy Cline in plane crashes around that time.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But that era, the Nashville Sound era, it marked this crucial professionalization of the country music industry in Nashville, moving it from a regional sound to one designed for national, even international appeal.
But maybe losing some grit along the way, fueling later reactions.
Exactly. It brought success, but also created that tension, that push and pull between commerce and perceived authenticity that runs through country music history.
And Countrypolitan kind of grows out of that, right?
Yeah.
Aiming even more directly at the pop market. Smoother still.
Yeah, you could say Countrypolitan was the next evolution or maybe an extension of the Nashville Sound, explicitly targeting those mainstream markets. It sold really well from the late 60s into the early 70s.
Who were the big Countrypolitan stars?
People like Tammy Wynette, Lynn Anderson, Rose Garden, Charlie Rich, The Most Beautiful Girl, and even some artists who had started in more hard country styles adapted, like Ray Price and Marty Robbins, found huge success with that sound too.
Interesting. But the traditionalists didn't disappear.
Not at all. And that's key. Even with the popularity of these smoother sounds, a lot of traditional country artists, Loretta Lynn, Merle Haggard, Buck Owens, Porter Wagoner, George Jones, Sonny James, continued to have major hits and huge careers throughout this period. The audience was big enough for both.
Good point. It seems like there was just a lot of trying different things, a lot of crossing over happening back then. I even saw a mention of a country soul crossover, Ray Charles.
That was a fascinating moment, 1962. Ray Charles, the genius of soul and R&B, he decides to record an album of country and Western music. Modern sounds in country and Western music.
Wow, how did that go over?
It was huge. His single, I Can't Stop Loving You, shot to #1 on the pop chart, sold millions. The album was a landmark release. It surprised a lot of people, blurred those genre lines even further, and maybe opened some ears in the pop world to the quality of country songwriting.
That's incredible. Okay, so on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, from smooth Nashville strings and Ray Charles covering country, we have the Bakersfield sound. That sounds like it was a direct reaction against that Nashville polish.
Exactly. You nailed it. Coming out of the hardcore honky-tonk scene down in Bakersfield, California.
Why Bakersfield?
Well, it had a big influx of people from Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas, the Okies. During the Dust Bowl and afterwards, they brought their music with them. So it was influenced by guys like Bob Wills, Lefty Frizzell, that harder edge stuff. And the Bakersfield sound was a direct contrast to the smooth Nashville sound. It really relied on electric instruments, especially that Fender Telecaster guitar, giving it this sharp, hard-driving, no-frill sound, trebly, clear.
Who were the main guys?
The two giants were Buck Owens and Merle Haggard, both huge stars, but with their own distinct styles within that Bakersfield framework. Buck was maybe a bit more straightforward honky-tonk. Merle brought in more Western swing and folk influences.
And Tommy Collins, Wynn Stewart.
Yeah. Other important figures. Ken Nelson, the producer at Capitol Records out there, was key too. And he also got into that trucking song subgenre with artists like Red Simpson, which added another layer to that Bakersfield identity. Even Haggard did trucking songs like White Line Fever.
It's wild how these regional sounds kept popping up and having such an impact. And it sounds like by this point, maybe late 60s, early 70s, the term country and Western was really stuck in people's heads.
Yeah, definitely. Those Western music influences, from the singing cowboys to Western swing to the Bakersfield sound, they'd been so strong for so long that country and Western just became the common way people referred to the whole genre.
Even though they were distinct things.
Right. And even today, you still see those cowboy and frontier themes running through country culture, the hats, the boots, the imagery, it endures.
Yeah, totally.
And out west, those regional Western genres kept thriving too. Red dirt music from Oklahoma.
What's red dirt?
It's kind of a blend, traditional country, rock and roll, blues, folk often with a more independent, maybe rebellious spirit compared to mainstream Nashville.
Yeah.
Think Bob Childers, Steve Ripley, The Great Divide later on.
Okay.
And New Mexico music, with unique sounds from artists like El Hurricane or Antonia Apodaca. Plus Texas country and Tejano music continued to be huge regionally, with folks like Willie Nelson starting out, Freddie Fender, Johnny Rodriguez, Little Joe.
Did these connect to the next phase?
Yeah, a lot of these sounds and artists would become really important and linked to the outlaw country movement that was just around the corner.
Okay, perfect segue. That brings us smack into the 1970s and 80s, the fourth wave, fourth generation. And the outlaw movement sounds like a really rebellious, defining time.
It definitely was outlaw country.
Oh.
It wasn't really one sound, but more an attitude, right? It grew from those traditional Western styles, honky-tonk, Bakersfield, those regional sounds we just talked about. And it was a real pushback against what artists like Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings saw as Nashville's slick, overproduced, formulaic approach.
They wanted creative control.
Exactly. They wanted to use their own bands, choose their own songs, produce their own records, often outside the main Nashville studio system, sometimes recording down in Austin, Texas.
Willie and Waylon, the iconic outlaws. Who else?
Well, Jerry Jeff Walker, Hank Williams Jr. started moving that way. Merle Haggard was always kind of an outlaw figure. Joe Ely. Even Johnny Cash had that vibe. Ray Price's band, the Cherokee Cowboys, was a breeding ground for outlaws like Willie and Roger Miller.
Right. And the outlaw image itself became a big part of it. Leather and denim.
Oh, yeah. While maybe partly created or hyped by the media and record labels, that image really resonated with audiences who felt disconnected from the polished Nashville sound. And that album wanted the Outlaws, featuring Willie, Waylon, Jesse Coulter, and Tomple Glazer.
Huge seller, right? First platinum country album.
Yep, first country album to sell 1 million copies. It really crystallized that moment. And even after the peak of the movement as a specific trend, a lot of those artists stayed popular, sometimes forming supergroups later, like the Highwaymen or the Texas Tornadoes.
The Highwaymen, Cash, Willie, Waylon, Christopherson, legends.
Absolutely.
Okay, so while the Outlaws are doing their thing, at the same time, we have this massive surge of country pop. It sounds like country music was really, really trying to break into the mainstream pop world in a big way.
Absolutely. It was happening concurrently. Country pop, which definitely had roots in countrypolitan, but also folk and soft rock. It emerged really strongly in the 70s with a clear goal, crossover success.
Getting on to top 40 radio.
Exactly. And later, adult contemporary stations, you started seeing pop singers having huge hits on the country charts. People like Glen Campbell, who kind of bridged the gap. Bobby Gentry, Ode to Billy Joe. John Denver.
John Denver again.
Yeah. He had massive success blending country and folk rock. And maybe most controversially at the time, Olivia Newton-John.
Well, Australia. Yeah.
She started winning CMA awards like Female Vocalist of the Year. And that sparked a real backlash from some traditional artists. George Jones, Tammy Wynette, Gene Shepard. They even formed a short-lived group called the Association of Country Entertainers, basically to protest this pop influx.
Wow, protecting the boundaries.
Pretty much. But on the other hand, you had artists like Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers, who achieved absolutely massive, long-lasting crossover success during this time. They became household names, true superstars in both country and pop.
Dolly and Kenny, yeah. Icons. Who else was big in that crossover space?
Crystal Gayle, Ronnie Milsap, Barbara Mandrell, they all had huge pop and country hits. As Paul Hemphill wrote back then, country music was becoming this hybrid, appealing to a much wider, more urban audience.
So that push and pull again. Artists wanting to reach more people, others wanting to keep it country.
Exactly. That tension is always there. And the pop crossover success continued strong into the early 80s with Willie Nelson having pop hits, Juice Newton, Kenny Rogers, Dolly, Eddie Rabbitt.
Right. But did it last?
It started to decline a bit in the late 1980s, partly because of the rise of that neo-traditionalist movement we'll get to. The pendulum swung back a bit.
Okay. And where does country rock fit into all of this? It seems like another blend happening around the same time.
Yeah, country rock had roots in the late 60s, but really took hold and became prominent in the 70s. In a lot of ways, it was a reaction against both the perceived traditionalism or conservatism in some rock circles and the slickness of the Nashville Sound in country.
So rock bands playing country or country bands playing rock?
Kind of both, really. You had early innovators like Bob Dylan exploring country sounds on albums like Nashville Skyline, The Byrds, especially when Graham Parsons joined.
Graham Parsons, crucial figure.
Absolutely. The Byrds' Sweetheart of the Rodeo album is a landmark. Then Graham Parsons went on to form the Flying Burrito Brothers with Chris Hillman, another ex-Byrd. Michael Naismith of the Monkees was doing country walk early on, too.
Right.
Even bands like the Grateful Dead and Neil Young incorporated a lot of country and folk elements. And then, of course, the Eagles.
The Eagles became the biggest, right?
Commercially, yes. Hugely successful, taking that California country rock sound to the masses. Even the Rolling Stones were playing around with country influences on songs like Dead Flowers or Faraway Eyes.
Graham Parsons is often called the father of country rock, isn't he?
He is, yeah. For his vision of blending the soul of country with the energy of rock. And his singing partner and protege, Emmylou Harris, really carried on his legacy beautifully after his early death.
Emmylou, yeah. Amazing voice.
And this whole genre blending eventually led to offshoots like Southern rock, Lynyrd Skynyrd, Allman Brothers, Heartland rock, Springsteen, Mellencamp, and eventually alternative country or alt country.
And pushed country artists towards rock, too.
Definitely. Over time, you saw more rock influence creeping into mainstream country. Artists like Juice Newton, Alabama in the 80s, later Hank Williams Jr., his son Hank III even more so, Gary Allan, Shania Twain, Brooks and Dunn, Faith Hill, Garth Brooks himself had rock elements, Dwight Yoakam, Steve Earle. Even Dolly Parton and Roseanne Cash explored rockier sounds at times. Linda Ronstadt, too, huge crossover star.
So many connections. Okay, I also saw the term neo-country pop up in this era, linked to a movie.
Yeah, neo-country. That term really gained traction, or maybe was even coined, because of the movie Urban Cowboy back in 1980.
With John Travolta, riding the mechanical bull.
That's the one. The movie and its soundtrack were massive hits and created this craze for a kind of slick, pop-influenced country sound and fashion. It was sometimes even described, maybe a bit unkindly, as neo-country disco music. And it led to this glut, this flood of pop country crossover artists landing on the country charts. Bill Medley from the Righteous Brothers, England Dan Seals, Tom Jones, Merrill Osmond, Marie Osmond.
A real mix.
Yeah. But like a lot of sudden trends, it kind of burned bright and faded. It saw a boom, but then kind of a bust in record sales and radio programming specifically for that sound.
Interesting. And we can't forget about the truckers. We mentioned them earlier, but truck driving country really seems like its own specific thing in the 70s and 80s.
It totally is. Truck driving country, which was kind of a fusion of honky-tonk, country rock, and that Bakersfield sound. It really focused lyrically on the life of a trucker, the CB radios, the diners, the long hauls.
Who were the key artists?
Dave Dudley, who we mentioned with 6 Days on the Road, he's often called the father of the genre. Red Sovine was famous for his sentimental trucker story songs like Teddy Bear.
Oh, yeah.
Dick Hurlis, Red Simpson Again. Del Reeves, the Willis Brothers. Jerry Reed had some trucker-themed hits. C.W. McCall with the massive novelty hit Convoy.
Like Convoy? Yeah.
And Cletus Maggard. It was a really popular subgenre for a good while.
Okay. And then as maybe a reaction to all that pop crossover, the urban cowboy thing, we get the neo-traditionalist movement starting in the mid-'80s. A return to classic sounds.
Exactly. You see the pattern, right? The pendulum swings. The neo-traditionalist movement was a very deliberate move away from that polished, pop-infused country sound that had dominated the charts.
Back to basics.
Pretty much. Back to the sounds of traditional honky-tonk, bluegrass, folk, western swing, real fiddles, real steel guitars, more traditional song structures and themes.
Who are the main artists leading that chart?
Oh, a whole wave of fantastic artists. Travis Tritt, Reba McEntire started moving more traditional than George Strait. Yep, George Strait, who just embodied that sound and became arguably the most consistent hitmaker in country history. Keith Whitley, tragically died young. Alan Jackson, John Anderson, Patti Loveless, Kathy Mattea, Randy Travis.
Randy Travis had a huge impact, right?
Massive. His arrival really signaled a shift. Dwight Yoakam, who blended Bakersfield with a kind of rockabilly edge. Clint Black came along right at the end of the 80s. Ricky Skaggs bringing bluegrass influences back to the mainstream. And the mother-daughter duo, the Judds.
Great list. So that really set the stage for the next decade.
Absolutely. It refreshed the genre and laid the groundwork for the huge boom that was coming in the 90s.
Okay, so the 90s, the fifth wave, fifth generation, sounds like a real golden age, a boom time for country music. What made it take off so much?
Well, a few key things came together, building on that neo-traditionalist momentum. One technical thing was the FCC's docket 8090 back in 1980.
It sounds exciting.
Well, what it did was lead to a big expansion of FM radio stations, especially into more rural and suburban areas where country music hadn't always been as widely available on the higher fidelity FM band. It had often been stuck on AM.
Better sound, wider reach.
Exactly. So country music migrated to FM, got polished up a bit more production-wise for that bigger audience. And another big change, Billboard magazine changed how it calculated its country charts in the early 90s.
How so?
They started relying much more heavily, eventually almost exclusively, on monitored radio airplay data from Nielsen rather than reports from stores and radio stations. This really influenced which songs got promoted and became hits, the ones getting the most spins on the big stations.
Okay. And Garth Brooks was right at the center of all that explosion, wasn't he?
Absolutely. Garth Brooks became a true worldwide phenomenon in the 90s. He didn't just sell records, he sold stadiums full. His album sales were astronomical, breaking records previously held by rock and pop legends. His concerts were these huge, high-energy spectacles.
Like a rock star, basically.
Totally. He brought that kind of showmanship and energy to country, and it took the music to a whole new level of mainstream popularity globally.
But he wasn't the only one riding that wave.
Not by a long shot. A lot of other artists had huge success during that 90s boom. Clint Black, who we mentioned, John Michael Montgomery, Tracy Lawrence, Tim McGraw launched his career then, Kenny Chesney too.
McGraw and Chesney, still huge today.
Yeah. Travis Tritt, Alan Jackson continued his run. The duo Brooks and Dunn became massive, combining honky-tonk with rock energy.
Yeah.
And George Strait, the king, just kept racking up the hits, like always. Toby Heath also started his career then, evolving over time.
It sounds like an amazing time for the guys. What about female artists? Did they share in that boom?
They absolutely did. The 90s were a fantastic decade for women in country music, too. You had established stars like Reba McEntire continuing their success, Patti Loveless. But also Faith Hill emerged as a superstar. Martina McBride, Dina Carter had huge hits. LeAnn Rimes burst onto the scene as a teenager.
Yeah.
Mindy McCready, Pam Tillis, Lori Morgan, Mary Chapin Carpenter with her folk country blend. And, of course, Shania Twain.
Right. And the Dixie Chicks were huge then, too, weren't they? Before the controversy.
The Dixie Chicks, now the Chicks, were incredibly popular towards the end of the 90s and early 2000s. Great musicianship, harmonies, attitude. Then, the controversy over Natalie Maine's comments about President Bush in 2003 led to a huge backlash from country radio and parts of the audience. They eventually went in a more rock-oriented direction and took a long hiatus before returning.
Right. And Shania Twain, you mentioned her. She wasn't just big in the U.S. She was a true international superstar, wasn't she?
Oh, Shania Twain's success was on another level globally. Her albums The Woman in Me, and especially Come On Over, they sold tens of millions of copies worldwide. Unprecedented for a country artist.
What made her break through like that?
Well, she, along with her producer husband Mutt Lange, who'd worked with rock fans like Def Leppard, they kind of broke away from traditional country stereotypes. They brought in major elements of pop and rock production, fashion, music videos. It broadened her appeal massively.
More accessible.
Yeah, very accessible, very catchy. She's really credited with breaking down international boundaries for country music and inspiring a lot of the genre blending that came later. A real trailblazer in that sense.
I definitely remember the line dancing craze from the early to mid-90s. Billy Ray Cyrus, Achy Breaky Heart. Did that have a big impact on the music itself beyond that one song?
It did, for a while there. The huge popularity of line dancing definitely influenced the kind of up-tempo, rhythmic songs that were being produced and promoted. Artists and labels wanted songs people could dance to in those country dance clubs that popped up everywhere.
Did everyone like it?
Not necessarily. Chet Atkins, the legendary producer and guitarist, famously said around that time that the music had gotten pretty bad because everyone was just trying to make line dance hits. And by the end of the decade, some choreographers were actually complaining that there wasn't as much good country line dance music being released anymore. The fad had kind of cooled musically.
Interesting how trends affect the music. And those new chart rules based on airplay, did they affect older artists?
Yeah, that was a downside for some. Artists who had built loyal followings and could still sell albums and concert tickets, but maybe weren't getting played as much on the big corporate radio stations. They found it harder to chart hits. Legends like Don Williams or even George Jones saw their radio presence diminish significantly under the new system.
Progress isn't always good for everyone. Now, while all this mainstream 90s boom was happening, there was also this other current alternative country, right? Kind of underground.
Yes, exactly. The alternative country movement, or alt country, sometimes got no depression after the influential magazine. Or even y'alternative by some.
The alternative.
Yeah. It really came about as a reaction against, or maybe just an alternative to, what some saw as the increasingly polished and commercial Nashville mainstream. It had roots in the cowpunk scene in Southern California in the 80s. Bands like the Long Riders, Lone Justice, the Beat Farmers, X.
Okay.
But it spread. Artists outside California who were blending country traditions with punk rock energy or folk storytelling or indie rock aesthetics, rejecting Nashville's conservatism. Think Lucinda Williams, Lyle Lovett, Steve Earle.
Steve Earle, yeah. Copperhead Road.
Big crossover hit. Jason and the Scorchers, Rubber Rodeo, even UK bands like the Mekons dabbled in it. Dwight Yoakam, though mainstream, had appeal across different audiences because of his Bakersfield roots and rockabilly edge.
And who were the key bands for defining alt country?
The band Uncle Tupelo from Illinois is hugely important. Their 1990 album No Depression is often considered the first real defining alt-country album, and like I said, gave the magazine its name.
And they split up.
Yeah, they split into two other really significant bands. Wilco, led by Jeff Tweedy, and Sun Volt, led by Jay Farrar. Both explored different facets of that country rock blend.
And Lucinda Williams was important too.
Lucinda Williams is pivotal. Her songwriting, her voice, she really bridged traditional country blues and rock influences. Other prominent acts that emerged include the Bottle Rockets, Handsome Family, Old 97s, it being quite a diverse scene.
Did it overlap with other genres?
Oh, yeah. Lots of overlap with red dirt music, jam bands sometimes, indie folk. It was less about a specific sound and more about an independent spirit and drawing on roots traditions outside the mainstream lane.
Did country radio play it?
Generally, no. Minimal support from mainstream country radio, despite sometimes strong album sales, like the Oh Brother, Where Art Thou soundtrack.
Oh, huge seller.
Massive. All traditional and roots music, basically alt-country adjacent. One album of the year at the Grammys. But country radio barely touched it. Sometimes crossover hits happen when pop or rock artists covered songs by alt-country writers, like Ryan Adams or Old Crow Medicine Show's Wagon Wheel.
Right, Wagon Wheel.
But the genre really gained more mainstream recognition and popularity starting in the 2010s with artists like the Civil Wars, Chris Stapleton breaking huge, Sturgill Simpson, Jason Isbell, and Casey Musgraves winning the overall Grammy for Album of the Year kind of signaled a shift too.
Stapleton's success was amazing. Okay, that takes us pretty neatly into the 2000s and right up to what's happening now, the sixth wave, sixth generation. It sounds like mixing genres has just become normal, even more common.
Absolutely. If the 90s saw major pop rock influence, the 2000s and beyond have seen the lines become even more blurred, massively blurred. You've seen tons of artists from pop and rock crossing over into country or collaborating. Richard Marx had country hits. Bon Jovi teamed up with Jennifer Nettles.
Kid Rock and Sheryl Crow.
Huge hit with Picture. Darius Rucker from Hootie and the Blowfish became a major country star.
So big.
Rock stars putting country songs on their albums, like Don Henley or Poison. And especially in the late 2010s and now, you see constant mainstream country collaborations with pop and R&B stars. It's almost expected.
And pop singers looking towards country, too.
Yeah, we've seen pop superstars showing interesting country sounds or themes. Beyoncé performing with the Chicks at the CMAs. Lady Gaga's Joanne album had country elements. Justin Timberlake's Man of the Woods. It signals a kind of cross-genre respect, maybe, or just chasing trends.
And a whole new generation grew up with that mix.
Yeah.
With Taylor Swift, Carrie Underwood.
Exactly. Artists like Taylor Swift, Miranda Lambert, Carrie Underwood, they emerged in this era and became massive stars, often addressing more modern themes and incorporating contemporary pop sounds right from the start.
And popular culture itself, especially those reality TV singing shows, seems to have played a huge part in launching new country artists in the 2000s.
Definitely. Carrie Underwood's win on American Idol back in 2005 was a watershed moment. She became an instant superstar.
She really did.
And it opened the door for other country artists who got their start, or at least major exposure, on shows like American Idol or Nashville Star. Miranda Lambert was on Nashville Star, Casey Musgraves too, Chris Young.
Right. It became a real pathway.
Yeah. Even actors who were known for teen sitcoms started crossing over into country music, like Jeanette McCurdy or Miley Cyrus in her early days, Jana Kramer. Actors from the TV show Nashville released music, someone from Pretty Little Liars. It became kind of a thing.
And groups became bigger again.
Yeah, the success of groups like Lady Antebellum, now Lady A, winning multiple Grammys, and Little Big Town with their amazing harmonies. Also duos like Florida Georgia Line, Dan plus Shay. Vocal groups and duos became really popular again in the contemporary scene.
And Taylor Swift's career, I mean, that's a whole fascinating journey in itself, watching her move between genres, isn't it?
It really is a unique case study. She started out firmly as a teen country idol. Massive success there. Then she gradually, then decisively, moved into pure pop superstardom.
Right, causing debates about what country even means.
Oh yeah, lots of debate. Is she still country? Was she ever really country? Then, more recently with her folklore and ever more albums, she returned to a more folk-inspired, acoustic singer-songwriter style that many felt had strong connections back to her country roots, or at least Americana. It just shows how fluid these genre boundaries can be for artists and audiences now.
Totally. So it sounds like modern country, especially mainstream country radio, is just a real melting pot of sounds and styles now. What are some of the specific newer trends we're seeing?
Well, definitely that increasing pop sound is still very prominent in a lot of mainstream country. Sometimes simpler song structures, pop melodies, electronic instrumentation, drum machines, synthesizers, even mobile styles like talk singing or incorporating elements of rap, sometimes called hip-hop. Lyrical themes are also changing, slowly reflecting more modern social issues sometimes, like LGBTQ plus acceptance in some songs, or safer sex messages, which would have been unheard of decades ago. And the influence of pop artists is just undeniable in the production and hooks.
And rock is still in the mix, too.
Oh, yeah. Overt rock influence is still really strong for many artists. People like Eric Church, Jason Aldean, Brantley Gilbert, Aaron Lewis from Stain has a country career. Canadian rocker Dallas Smith is big in country now. It's a hard rock edge blended with country themes.
And even more electronic sounds.
Yeah, we've seen fusions of electro-pop in country, like Maren Morris collaborating with Zedd on that huge pop hit, The Middle.
Right.
And the whole country trap phenomenon.
Old Town Road.
Exactly. Lil Nas X's Old Town Road just blew everything up, broke all the chart records. It blended country themes and imagery with a trap beat. That opened the door for other artists like Blanco Brown, The Get Up, Brelin. It even sparked a minor line dancing revival again.
Full circle.
Kind of. And even stranger blends like emo rap artists collaborating with country singers. It's constantly mixing.
Wow. Okay. And what about bro country? That was a term that got thrown around a lot for a while there in the 2010s.
Yes. Bro country. That term described a wave of country music that was really popular, especially in the early to mid-2010s.
What defined it?
Lyrically, it tended to focus on themes like drinking beer, partying, girls, often in tight jeans or cut-off shorts, pickup trucks, dirt roads, a kind of checklist of modern rural suburban tropes.
Who are the key artists?
Luke Bryan was often seen as the poster child, Jason Aldean, Blake Shelton had hits in that vein, and especially the duo Florida-Georgia Line, their song Cruise.
Oh, yeah, inescapable.
Right, especially the remix with Nelly. It became the best-selling digital country song of all time. At one point, a huge percentage of the songs in the country charts fit that bro country description.
But it got criticized.
Heavily criticized. By critics, by other artists, by some fans, mainly for the repetitive themes, the often simplistic lyrics, and particularly the way women were frequently portrayed as passive objects or accessories to the party.
Right.
It led to a lot of debate within the country music world, sometimes framed as a civil war between bro country and more traditional or female artists. The duo, Maddie and Tay, even had a hit song, Girl in a Country Song, directly parodying and criticizing the bro country cliches.
That's clever. So it seems like there's always this back and forth, isn't there, between those more pop-leaning, maybe trend-chasing sounds and a desire for something more traditional or rootsy. Is that where bluegrass and Americana fit in today?
Exactly. As mainstream country has continued to lean heavily into pop, rock, and even hip-hop sounds, bluegrass and Americana have become increasingly prominent and important genres for artists and fans looking for something different, often perceived as more authentic or roots-based.
Bluegrass is still going strong.
Definitely. Bluegrass, with its deep history tracing back to those Irish, Scottish, and English folk traditions that Bill Monroe synthesized, it continues to have incredibly talented and popular artists carrying the torch, like Billy Strings or Molly Tuttle, who are winning Grammys and selling out big venues.
Cool. And Americana. What exactly is Americana? It seems broad.
It is broad, and that's kind of the point. It rose as a term in a genre, partly as a counter to that pop-infused mainstream country. It basically encompasses a wide range of American roots music styles: folk, country, blues, R&B, rock and roll, gospel, sometimes blended together. You could even argue Hank Williams was an early Americana artist in spirit.
So who identifies with Americana now?
A lot of artists who have a more traditional country, folk, or roots rock sound, but maybe don't fit the slick production or lyrical themes of mainstream country radio. People like Tyler Kilter, Zach Bryan, Sturgill Simpson, Jason Isbell, Old Crow Medicine Show again. They often associate more with Americana or alt country.
So it's a home for the traditionalists.
It can be, yeah. Or just artists who want more creative freedom. Even established acts who maybe fell out of favor on country radio, like Emmylou Harris or Lyle Lovett, have found a welcoming home and renewed appreciation within the Americana scene and award structure.
So that contemporary country and Western revival that started back in the 80s, it seems like it's still kind of happening, just maybe under different names like Americana or alt country.
Yeah, you can definitely see it that way. That movement towards more traditional sounds, driven by those neo-traditionalists in the mid-'80s, has continued in different forms and waves.
Right.
The big commercial boom of the late '80s and '90s was fueled by it, though artists like Garth Brooks successfully fused that traditional bass with rock showmanship and pop accessibility. Brooks and Dunn brought rock elements too.
And the sound kept evolving.
Yeah, even within that broadly traditional framework, artists updated the styles. Think of Lori Morgan or Mary Chapin Carpenter bringing different perspectives in the '90s. And then you saw country music becoming more overtly patriotic, especially post 9/11.
Lee Greenwood's God Bless the USA kind of set a tone earlier.
Yeah, that song became an anthem and maybe foreshadowed that roots of conservative-themed country. After 9/11, artists like Alan Jackson, Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning?, Toby Keith, courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue, Charlie Daniels, Daryl Worley, they had huge hits reflecting that national mood. Ryan Adams even did a moving tribute.
So politics and current events always play a role too.
Always interwoven. And today, even as those pop country artists, Nashville's new generation, dominate the charts and radio, you still see artists who push boundaries stylistically, like Casey Musgraves mixing country with disco and pop elements, getting recognized by major awards like the Grammys. Even if they face some criticism from hardcore traditionalists, the conversation continues.
Wow, that was quite a trip. Almost a century of country music history packed in there. From those really early fiddle tunes and ballads.
Right, all the way to country trap and electro-pop collabs.
It really is amazing how much it's changed, how many twists and turns it's taken. We saw it go from these very regional folk sounds to a nationwide, even global phenomenon.
Yeah, and the huge impact of technology, recording, radio, television, the internet now, and always that constant push and pull, that tension between respecting tradition and trying out new things, blending with other genres.
And a few things that really stuck with me from our chat. The fact that women like Samantha Bumgarner and Eva Davis were making country records right there at the very beginning in 1924.
Yeah, that's often overlooked.
The initial resistance to something as basic as drums.
Seems crazy now, right?
How even political views maybe played a role in the relationship, or lack thereof sometimes, between the folk revival and country music back in the 60s.
That cultural divide was real.
And those more recent discussions and debates around things like the bro country sound and what that says about the genre at a particular moment.
Those are definitely some key moments, some flashpoints that show just how dynamic and, ever-evolving this genre really is. And it really shows how country music has this incredible knack for absorbing influences, adapting to the times, and reflecting American culture, for better or worse sometimes.
So for you listening, we really hope this deep dive has given you a better handle, a clearer picture of this huge and fascinating musical world. As we said, it's so much more than just that classic twang or the cowboy hats. It's really a story about American culture, about innovation, and about constant change.
It really is. And it makes you think, doesn't it? Given this whole history of constant change and blending, what do you think will be the next big shift in country music, or the next big debate? How is that balance between tradition and trying new things going to keep playing out in the years to come? Maybe checking out some of the specific artists or subgenres we talked about today might give you some clues.